you very much for coming. Welcome to members of the media. I have with me this morning the Honourable Stuart Young, Member of Parliament for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, Senator the Honourable Amery Browne, and we'll also be joined by the Honourable Colm Imbert. The first person to be speaking, first Member of Parliament to be speaking today would be the Honourable Stuart Young, addressing a couple issues, but the two that I will maintain he will speak about would be the issue, the COVID judgment, as well as the issue of the Dragon gas deal. But before Honourable Stuart Young speaks, I'd just like to say that I'd just like to say that before the Honourable Stuart Young speaks, I think most of you would have seen a release put out by the Honourable Minister Rudal Munilal, making reference to the fact that the Honourable Dr. Keith Rowley, the Honourable Stuart Young, the Honourable Pennelope Beckles, that we will, in essence, kill the Dragon gas deal. I just want to start by asking the Honourable Minister Munilal whether or not he was present at the discussions with the Honourable Prime Minister and Mr. Rubio, Secretary of State. Minister Munilal is the Minister of Energy, and he should probably wonder why it is that the Honourable Prime Minister did not take her with him for these very, very important discussions, that he will put out such a release which makes absolutely no sense. Minister Young.
Thank you, Honourable Pennelope Beckles, Leader of the Opposition and Member of Parliament for Arima. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to members of the media and to the wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. I'd like to start by saying that any positive development for Trinidad and Tobago, anything that will progress Trinidad and Tobago in the right direction, is something that the PNM will obviously be happy about and encourage. I'm starting with the whole Dragon gas issue and smiling at the irony of what we're dealing with here today. Because to take your minds immediately back to President's House, just a few months ago, after the swearing in of a cabinet, and none other than the Honourable Prime Minister, announcing to the world at large, Dragon was dead with glee. Dragon is dead, and that they would pursue gas in Grenada, Guyana, and Suriname, and that is where they would be. We find ourselves right back here today. It is this PNM administration that did the hard work and the legwork from 2016 all the way through to 2025 with respect to the pursuit of the Dragon gas field, which I want to remind Trinidad and Tobago, because it is obvious that the government will mislead you and the government will be akin to snake oil salesmen. The Dragon gas field is completely within the maritime borders of Venezuela. The Dragon gas field is completely owned by the people of Venezuela, and it is the PNM government that negotiated through very difficult and trying times and managed in December 2023, after many years, to obtain a 30-year exploration, production and export of gas license from the Dragon field to Trinidad and Tobago waters. That license, which was published by the Venezuelan government and gazetted, and it was the same Minister Munilal, then opposition member Munilal, who with glee was circulating it in public. It was published in Spanish in their gazette in Venezuela. Should read the terms of this 30-year license. So the first point is The Dragon gas is owned by Venezuela, and the field is completely situated in Venezuela, and they have the rights to the gas and the gas field. That is Venezuela. The second thing is what we saw yesterday and the development between Secretary of State Rubio and Prime Minister and her very large entourage that did not include the Minister of Energy. And the announcement by the Secretary of State is absolutely no different to the conversations that he had with me and the PNM administration when I was Prime Minister. I met with him, as you would recall, in Jamaica. We had good conversation. After that, OFAC did cancel the licenses that existed for Dragon as well as Coquina Field. After that, you would recall, and I saw it properly reported in one of the newspapers today, the Newsday, you would recall that Secretary of State Rubio had a conversation with me as Prime Minister later on in April, where he made it abundantly clear. And he put out a release, and you should go back to the same release he put out, saying that he will work with us on our energy security and our energy deals. And in the world of diplomacy and diplomatic language, that is what we were talking about. However, premature Minister Munilal coming out and selling to the country, as is the Prime Minister, that they have obtained something is completely false. We had obtained an initial OFAC license in January 2023, where they spell out the terms of what they would allow. And in that license, they had said that you could not pay Venezuela and the people of Venezuela in fiat currency. It had to be in kind. The same UNC were grilling us in the PNM and asking how many times I traveled to Venezuela. And the same Munilal making a lot of noise and fanfare about me going there 13 times. Well, let us see what they do now. Because on every single one of those occasions, it was to meet with the government of Venezuela and their technocrats to then negotiate the terms upon which they would be prepared to allow Dragon gas to be sold to Trinidad and Tobago. And they would not do it for in kind. So you would then recall back and forth, I was going up to Washington, then obtained an amendment to that OFAC license for Dragon later on in October of 2023 that said you can pay in fiat currency, which is basically recognized currency, whether it be in EU dollars or whether it be in United States dollars. It allowed us to be able to pay for the gas. And then it was in December that we finally managed to negotiate the 30-year license. Look at the language very carefully from Secretary Rubio's office that talks about what they are prepared to look at. That's the first point. The second is you now have to go through applying to OFAC and waiting on the terms of the license from OFAC. And it is only then you will know what is the landscape and playing field that you can now go to Venezuela and attempt to negotiate. But as I just said, you have to go to Venezuela and negotiate with Venezuela, the owners of the gas. It is absolutely no secret the position and the stance of this government, and in particular from the voice of the Prime Minister towards our closest neighbor and the government of Venezuela. And if Munilal doesn't know it, the Vice President of Venezuela is also the Minister of Energy in Venezuela now, and the person in charge of these resources. And her name is Delcy Rodriguez. And it is the same Munilal who wrote to the United States government asking for Dr. Rowley and Stuart Young to be sanctioned for meeting with the Vice President of Venezuela, who is now the Minister of Energy, Delcy Rodriguez, who they have been in a to and fro fight with in a most disrespectful manner over the last weeks. I started by saying that we in the PNM would always welcome any positive development for Trinidad and Tobago that would benefit the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But we will not stand by quietly whilst this government continues in its attempts to mislead the population of Trinidad and Tobago as to the realities. They have a long road ahead of them. And a road where they say, on this occasion, it is 3 hands that have to clap, not 2. And it is the same Delcy that every week we went to Parliament, I had to be hearing from them as they hurled abuse at us on our side about our interactions with the Vice President of Venezuela and the Minister of Energy. So, Trinidad and Tobago, please do not once again allow yourselves to be fooled by snake oil salesmen who unfortunately hold very high office in Trinidad and Tobago. Additionally, a junior minister almost dragged us into an international furor with a very silly video about a country with nuclear weapons nuking Venezuela and then engaging a tit for tat with the same Minister of Energy and Vice President of Venezuela. So all that we have been saying over the years remains the landscape that we're currently dealing with. There is a license that may still be in place because it is always open to a government to cancel a license. And there are terms and conditions attached to that 30-year license for Dragon that may not have been met in this intervening period. So to listen to the cheering and the pom-pom behavior of some when we know the reality of what we face is why we've come here today to caution, but also the irony of and the glee with Dragon being dead. You would remember the many conversations that the UNC had and all of the eggs in Dragon basket. Of course, as we warned, because it was immediately after the swearing in the next week, I faced the population and the media, and we from the PNM informed Grenada, no proven reserves, Guyana and Suriname, we were already exploring potential there. And again, that was not going to be a short or medium term horizon. And I also caution this. The big gas project Manatee is part of a cross-border field called Loran Manatee. And it is us who negotiated in 2018 to separate Manatee and have the ability by putting aside the unitization agreement to pursue Manatee. That is an agreement with the same government of Venezuela. So all of the behavior could also potentially jeopardize these types of projects. So we, like everyone else, look forward to see how the landscape unfolds, but we are very mindful of who owns the gas in Dragon and what exactly needs to take place. And challenge the Prime Minister, challenge Minister Munilal. Show us the OFAC license that you've received, because it is literally a license that you receive with the terms and conditions that set out the parameters upon which you can negotiate. And that is the starting document to then go and have conversation with those who own the gas. So please, Trinidad and Tobago, do not allow them to fool you. But also the irony, ask yourself of the irony of coming back straight to Dragon, which is what we had been seeing all along. The second point that I'd like to deal with is the Court of Appeal this week delivered a decision, 3 members of the Court of Appeal, which is coming out of the COVID that we were dealing with. Unfortunately, many have forgotten the very trying times of managing COVID and life and death, and it was a global pandemic, and that no country in the world had a clear pathway or policy or any map as to how to properly deal with COVID. There was no set precedent. We were all learning. And I wondered, as I saw the attorney, Anand Ramlogan, and I'll come to him in a short while, come out and put out a statement trying to characterize the decision of the Court of Appeal. How many have actually read the decision of the Court of Appeal? The first thing I'd like to say is they decided a very narrow point. They decided that it was unconstitutional for the government and for the Minister of National Security and the Ministry of National Security, myself at the time, not to publish the policies and what were being applied in the grant of exemptions. That is all that it was. And interestingly, the court has said some of the following, and I invite you all to read the decision. Justice of Appeal Barrow said, there is no dispute, however, that the minister had the power to lawfully limit the entry of nationals into Trinidad and Tobago, having regard to the public health crisis which occurred at the time, but that power was not at large. They also refer to in the judgment that there were over 5,700 applications for exemption to enter the country at the time. And let us remember, we had limited quarantine space because the policy that was being adopted was you can only allow people back in if there's quarantine space, because we have limited health facilities and we're trying to save our population and look after the population and save lives. So to characterize it in the way that Anand Ramlogan has, and I'll deal with the issue of shame in a short while, is just simply not astonishing, knowing the character, but unacceptable. The Court of Appeal also went on to say the challenge is not to the subsidiary regulations which impose the travel ban on entry into Trinidad and Tobago. Neither is it a challenge to the criteria themselves. The challenge is in effect to the manner in which the exemptions were administered by applying a criteria which was not disclosed to the public. So the point is, all it was about the non-disclosure of the criteria to the public for a short period of time, from when the borders were closed at the end of March to about the 27th of July of that same year when they were published. And I just want to read what Justice of Appeal Barrow went on to say, because this has not been referred to and wouldn't be referred to by Mr. Ramlogan. In coming to my conclusion in this appeal, I am deeply mindful that the minister and his team, indeed the entire cabinet, were faced with a very difficult situation, the management of a pandemic in which the health and indeed the security of the entire population was at serious risk. They were required to make hard decisions which negatively affected many people. I am also mindful that 5 years later, having survived largely unscathed through the skillful efforts of the executive, it is now easy with hindsight to apportion blame. That is certainly not my intention here. That is a recognition of how the government handled the COVID pandemic by the same Court of Appeal judge and the reality. But to look at something in hindsight after COVID and after all of the difficulties is very easy for some to go astray. Justice of Appeal Ronnie Boodoo Singh went on to use very, very similar language. So the point is, the case was only determined on a very narrow point, that to not publish the policy for a few short months affected constitutional rights. But of course, mindful that there were 5,700 plus people seeking exemption, where at any given time, there were limited quarantine spaces for them to come into. And for have Anand Ramlogan, an attorney in the matter, put out a statement calling that people should hang their heads in shame. First of all, I use the opportunity once again to thank the public health officials who did a magnificent job in saving our lives and working with the executive. As the leader of the opposition reminded me prior to the conference, Trinidad and Tobago also received a number of international accolades, including from the head of the WHO, at our management, the building of a parallel healthcare system, etc. behind. If there is anyone who should hang their heads in shame in this country at the bar, is a former Attorney General who is before criminal courts with criminal charges to answer for witness tampering and other aspects of breach of criminal law. So population, please do not allow these persons, either with the Dragon gas deal or with matters such as the management of COVID, mislead us, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Okay, I indicated earlier that the Honourable Stuart Young has another engagement, so that we'll take questions. You can take questions now from the Honourable Stuart Young, followed by the Honourable Colm Imbert, where we'd also take questions. So, any questions on the floor?
Thank you. Thanks, Leader of the Opposition.
There's a line in the agreement that was
What agreement you talking?
that was referred to yesterday, the dragon.
The statement.
Yeah, well, yeah, about Rubio saying that it must not benefit the Maduro.
President Maduro.
Yes. Now, did you all have that same?
Thank you very much, Ria, for that question. And that is the line that we must focus on. And that is why I took the time to touch on the first OFAC license that was exactly along those terms in January of 2023. What one can interpret that to mean, one of the interpretations possible is no payment in fiat currency. After we were granted that OFAC license, I recall the number of times that we then had to travel to Venezuela to try and negotiate, etc. So I don't want to be premature on anything or speculate, because the truth is no one knows. Munilal doesn't know, the Prime Minister don't know, because until they show us the OFAC license that will set out the terms, one does not know. But that language is very carefully chosen language by Secretary Rubio, and we wait to see how it finds itself, if it finds itself at all, into an OFAC license.
Belongs to Venezuela. Within Venezuela, territorial states. Given that reality, given the fact that this administration has had such a hostile relationship with Venezuela, do you think that the celebration and all the sort of the sense that this is a fantastic thing that they have, and that it is going to come to fruition, that is based on some kind of expectation that there will be regime change?
I cannot put myself into the mind or the thought process of the UNC administration in place. I was not present in any discussions they had. Our position as the PNM remains the position that we've always adopted, which is to abide by the UN principles, the Charter of Non-Interference, Non-Intervention, and we are clear that that is not something that we are involved with. But even if there is a lot of grounds still to be traveled with respect to this. And that is why I'm back at focus on the OFAC license. Why a need for an OFAC license? It is because the US have put sanctions on the United States, on Venezuela, sorry, and how you operate with Venezuela. So we wait and see, what has happened, what happens.
Good afternoon, Mr. Young. Elvishi from TV6. You did mention your travels to Venezuela those 13 times. You have, of course, negotiated with those authorities. Could you give us a glimpse of what those negotiations were like? Were they difficult negotiations, and how do you anticipate, given our government now, their stance, their support, Trinidad and Tobago's support over U.S. military strikes against narco trafficking? How will that impact those negotiations?
I can't say, again, that's speculation. You're asking me to speculate. I can tell you about the negotiations. They were extremely difficult negotiations. There was much more than 13 trips. Those trips were during a period of time, and not having the ability to pay the government and pay the people of Venezuela for their gas, those were some of the most difficult conversations. But remember, the opportunity to even have the conversation, to even be in the room to speak with the decision makers, the same Delcy Rodriguez, Vice President of Venezuela and Minister of Energy now, as well as the President of Venezuela, are as a result of diplomatic respect and relations. One must tread very, very carefully. They are no different to any human being, that if you insult a person, how do you then engage in productive conversation immediately after? If worse yet, if you threaten people as well. So I wait to see how it will be achieved. But commercially, it is extremely difficult, getting to the 30-year license, as you all know, took years of criticism by the opposition, of attacks by the opposition, of them even writing asking for the US to sanction us, etc. So let's see how they answer that question.
Would you like to add anything, Ms.
No,
Beckles?
I mean, I think what for me is amazing is the fact that this government is saying they have such excellent relationships with Venezuela. I mean, it's totally contrary to everything that has gone on over the last couple of months. But what it really tells us is the significance of diplomatic relations, is the significance of sovereignty, and the significance of the region being a zone of peace. And that's why we have to be so very, very careful about what you say. Because here it is that you are now taking a 360-degree turn, and you're now saying that the same Venezuela that you said all sorts of things about, and that is the identical country that you're going to now to deal with.
So, in your perception, was this deal sabotaged even by posturing even before it was negotiated with the US?
Well, I cannot say that. But what I would say, and endorse the comments of the Honourable Stuart Young, is that during the time that the negotiations were taking place and completed, I mean, there was absolutely no support at all from this government at the time. As a matter of fact, if you look at a statement a couple might have been just about a month ago, the Honourable Prime Minister said the deal is it's dead. I mean, and made it very clear that you're going to deal with other countries, as Honourable Stuart Young said. I mean, Guyana, Suriname, and Grenada, those were the countries. And you would have seen, if I recall correctly, 2 weeks ago that the Prime Minister of Grenada was here, right? So, and lo and behold, you are in the United States, and I mean, you are celebrating something that you totally condemned. Yes.
If I may just add something to what was raised there. You asked about this government talking about they have good relations with Venezuela, with the people of Venezuela. Again, in the world of diplomacy, when one party comes out like that, would you not expect, if it were true, the other hand to clap and to confirm yea or nay? The crickets and the silence speak massively in the world and the reality of geopolitics and diplomacy.
Yes.
Mr. Young, I know that you don't want to engage in conjecture and speculation.
I won't. Not that I don't.
But I know that you would have painted a picture of the challenges and the difficulties that you would have had to maneuver just to, get a listing here from officials in Venezuela. I'm sure this entire news cycle we're hearing different headlines. Dragon is dead, Dragon is not dead. Dragon can dance, Dragon cannot dance. Where are we, in your opinion? You would have sat at the table, you would have engaged in discussions. What is your position? Do you think there's a future in this particular deal?
The only gas that is readily available that would satisfy Trinidad and Tobago's energy sector, as we have said in the PNM administration for years, is that cross-border gas, and in particular the Dragon field. I have come here and very carefully listed some of the potentials that you need to look at to make this a reality. The Prime Minister, you all would recall it yesterday in a release, did not even mention Dragon. It was Secretary Rubio's office that talked about Dragon. I'm also telling you, they have not obtained an OFAC license because it is not the Secretary of State or the State Department that issues that. That comes from the Department of Treasury and a particular office. Of course, Secretary Rubio will have a huge say, if not the say, as to the administration's position. But we got OFAC license. That's why I'm telling you all, in January 2023, we got one where they set out the terms, found that to be unworkable, went back whilst negotiating with Venezuela, making applications for amendments, etc. That came in October 2023. So until that is in hand, they don't even have a starting point with Venezuela. And I suspect I know what they're counting on, because I saw it sort of mentioned somewhere. I think they're counting on the relationship with the energy companies. But ultimately, the energy companies will not determine Venezuelan government's policy and what they do with their gas. Correct? Because I was the one who brought them to the table. And during those several negotiations, there were occasions when the Venezuelan government was very prepared to say another operator. And we are the ones who held it together. So the relationship with the government of Venezuela is what is key and critical in making this a reality and a successful one.
Any more? I was going to ask anybody, any more questions? Okay.
Venezuela posturing that the UNC has engaged in. To me, clearly, it was designed to get themselves in a good position with the Americans to get the Dragon deal going. So, I mean, they must have thought of, and I come back to my original question.
The Prime Minister and the government have to face the population, and they are the ones that you must ask that question to. Asking us in the opposition that question is of absolutely no moment or use. They are the ones. Don't ask us to speculate or to use Jesse's language, engage in conjecture as to what they may have discussed. Ask them frontally that question if they will face you. Ask them how it is that they're going to get gas from Venezuela, owned by Venezuela, with a government of Venezuela, and put the question to them. Don't put that to us. We have no answers for that.
Oversee? Yeah, we'll go to Oversee and then we come back to you, Sean.
Well, my question is on COVID, if the judgment.
Of course.
Are you for energy? Okay, so we can take that. Yeah.
So, tell me anything. Well, when I saw the headline, cross-border gas, I am assuming it was not Dragon. I'm assuming it was the joint. I'm thinking Lauren Manatee. I'm thinking Mannequin Coquina. So on that trend line of thought, I would ask actually, does the deunitization agreement between our two nations on the Lauren Manatee, does that still stand? Please.
The answer is yes, it currently still stands. I mean, even for us to get that deal and that agreement was a very difficult task. So that does stand. But Sean, again, it was clear from Secretary of State Rubio's office and the statement he put out. That's where we all focused on. He's the one that used the Dragon.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so on COVID.
Sure. Mr. Young, and you did say in hindsight, everything is clear in hindsight.
I didn't say that. The judge
The
said
judge,
that.
you quoted the
Correct.
judge, Justice Burrow, I believe.
Correct. Justice of Appeal Barrow and Justice Budu Singh
Budu
of
Singh.
Appeal Budu Singh said it as well.
In that case, in hindsight, would you have done anything differently? What would that be? What would you have done differently as it relates to the entry of case sensitivity?
Good question. This whole case and this decision, which overturned the judge at first instance, is all about the publication of the policy for exemption. That is all that is about. So I think the only thing that one can say with respect to that is maybe have published the policy a lot sooner. But you are dealing with difficulties. Remember, this is not a policy decided by Stuart Young or by the cabinet, etc. We are being guided by public servants. And I'm not speaking only about the public health officials. Also, as the judgment points out, it's over 5,700 applications for exemption at that point in time. It was a very good team of public servants at the Ministry of National Security that were combing through this. You're always going to have people who think, well, it should be me now. But if you say, okay, we, as the policy said, the elderly and those with ailments would be the first persons dealt with, and the ability to absorb into Trinidad and Tobago, let's say is 100 people, and you have 200 people fitting in that category, are you not going to have 200 people who are dissatisfied? So again, all we're seeing here is a continuation by Anand Ramlogan and the UNC of attacking what we were trying to do at the time to protect the population under COVID. So the only thing I can say in response to that is maybe could have published the policy for exemptions at an earlier period. Like it was the 22nd of March to the 26th or 27th of July. It wasn't years. It was just where nowhere in the world had these things. You were trying to build it out. Okay, I think Ria, one question.
I think the court found, if I remember, it was a bit unfair because you all allowed people, I think, to come in for a game.
The court found out Hannah and Ramlogan talked about this financier and la 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 la. And
No, there was a specific game, I think, that was going on, that people were allowed to come in while nationals were.
Not during that period of time. Remember, the period of time you're looking at here is between March 22nd and 26th of July, of the height of when COVID was taking the world. No team, that may have happened later on when it was CPL, a year later, etc., when you had different things playing out. So again, don't let them conflate the two. All right? Any other questions before me?
It indicated that Mr. Young is leaving, so we're just going to take a quick picture.
What?
Okay, so we are. Thank you, Stuart. Okay, yeah. So I'd now like to invite the Honourable Colm Imbert, as I indicated, to deal with the whole issue of the assessment from Standard and Poor's, as well as the whole issue of the property tax, and as it relates to some recent statements from local government.
Thank you very much, Leader of the Opposition, my colleague, Dr. Browne, members of the media. By the way, I have to talk and run. I apologize in front. I came from an event and I have to go back there, regrettably, very quickly. With respect, let me talk about property tax first. There has been quite a lot of controversy in the media, on social media, in the public domain, etc., over the last week or so, about statements made by the Minister of Planning in the Parliament, in the Senate actually, with respect to the collection and distribution of property tax. And the clear understanding of everybody who heard him speak was that local government corporations had received certain amounts of property tax. That is certainly what comes out in all the stories in the media about it. Each corporation, primarily P&M corporations, came out and said they received no property tax money whatsoever, in contradiction to what it was thought that he said. I noticed something in the papers yesterday or the day before, that he said he never said that, and go and listen to the proceedings, check the Hansard and so on. So on my way down here, I actually tuned into Palview to that sitting and listened to him. And unfortunately for him, and Minister Stuart Singh has a habit of saying things that are really inappropriate. He did say that the money paid and distributed across the corporations was XYZ. Now that's the English language. Money paid and distributed across the corporations. Anybody who understands English language would understand that to mean that the corporations receive the amounts of money he spoke about, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, and so on. The fact of the matter is that the property tax was initially set up for the money to go into the consolidated fund, for it to be collected by the Treasury. Because the corporations were not in a position to collect the tax. To collect property tax, you need all sorts of things. You need cashiers, you need a vault, you need arrangements for cash in transit, you need a waiting area for the public, you need audit function, and so on. So we in finance had actually done an assessment of each corporation, and various corporations were in various stages of readiness. The Port of Spain Corporation, surprisingly, was very far advanced and was in fact in a position to collect the property tax. Other corporations, because they were not in the habit of collecting large sums of money, were not ready. So what we decided to do was we would put the money into the consolidated fund and get all the corporations ready and then distribute the money to them, and then they would continue to collect it thereafter. So categorically, no corporation ever received any property tax. Just want to put that on record. With respect to Standard & Poor's now, two things have happened. Standard & Poor's has maintained our investment grade rating at BBB minus, and it has changed our outlook from stable to negative. Now the rating itself, the credit rating of BBB minus, which is the lowest level of the investment grade, after that you get into the speculative grade, would have been based, and this is based on my own experience for the 9 years I was there, would have been based on information presented to Standard & Poor's during their visit. Now, Standard & Poor's came on the 23rd of July. So that's just 2 months, 3 weeks after the general election. And from my own personal experience, the information presented to Standard & Poor's would have been up to date to April, possibly May. Okay? So that the information given to Standard & Poor's would have been based on what the previous government had done. And therefore, I'm quite happy that the investment grade rating was maintained, because that would have been based on the fiscal outturn, revenue, expenditure, and other things that would have been done prior to the general election. With respect to the outlook has changed to negative for two reasons. In the media review, the new government decided to increase the budgeted expenditure for fiscal 2025 by $3.143 billion, thereby increasing the deficit to over $9 billion. Now, a deficit is the difference between your revenue and your expenditure. You have to borrow for the deficit. So automatically, well, Standard & Poor's, they read these things. They would have read the minister's speech. They would look at the media review. And these numbers would be presented to them when they came. They would ask for it. So they would see that the new government decided to spend $3 billion more in fiscal 2025 without any additional revenue, which is why the deficit would have gone to $9 billion. And obviously, they would not have been very happy about that. They would have taken a dim view of that the new government is increasing expenditure without increasing revenue. So that's the first reason why the outlook would go from stable to negative. The second reason is that we had worked on several new revenue generating instruments. One would be the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, which is basically to deal with tax evasion, because there's a lot of tax evasion outside there. So the Revenue Authority was designed to deal with tax evasion, and the estimates of the amount of additional revenue that could be earned through the TTRA varied from 3 billion to 5 billion to as much as $10 billion, but certainly it was in the billions. And the second one, of course, would be property tax. So Standard & Poor's would have seen the government scrap the TTRA, so that stream of potential revenue that would come from a modernized revenue collection system, gone, and also scrap property tax. So the stream of revenue that would come from there, gone too. And then, of course, you had the unfortunate developments with the Dragon deal and so on just before the election, where United States decided they would not continue the licensing arrangement for the Dragon gas project. So they would have looked at that in totality. As I said, I'm very happy the investment grade rating was maintained. I don't know what will happen next year. We'll see. But certainly the outlook changed to negative because of those two actions of the government: scrapping property tax, scrapping TTRA, and also increasing the deficit without a source of revenue. I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Okay. Any questions? Sure.
Can you quantify these three possible factors? Three possible, okay, maybe quantify the weightiness of each of them in the decision making. Was there any evidence provided
Sorry, shall I repeat this? Okay, so I was asking Mr. Imbert said there are three factors that could have led to not the downgrade, but the change of outlook from stable to negative. And I'm asking, can you quantify, is there any way you could put a weighting to each one of these factors, or was it like stated at all? Can you either, or anyhow, can you come up with any sort of weighting for the three of them, please?
I would say they had a lot of weight. That should be obvious. If you want to collect $3 to $5 billion additional through an enhanced and modernized revenue collection system, then certainly that's gone. That's $3 to $5 billion gone. And remember, we had a $5 billion deficit. So if the Revenue Authority was in full operation and achieved its full potential, then we would have had a balanced budget. So certainly the scrapping of the TTRA is a very weighty matter. And also the removal of property tax as an additional stream of revenue, that's also a weighty matter. In terms of the percentage, I can't tell you that. But I can tell you they are very significant.
I mean, the suspicion might be that the actual dragon gas is the whole, the dragon gas really pulled the rug from under the economy, and that might have had more weight than the other two.
I can't tell you that. Okay. I didn't see the dragon gas mentioned in the S&P report, did you?
Well, I can't access it. It's very hard. I haven't subscribed.
Online, I'll send you a copy.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't see the dragon gas mentioned in there. Okay. I saw the TTRA mentioned, and I saw the revenue, the property tax mentioned. It's there in black and white. So do your research.
I'll have to subscribe first.
I'll send it to you.
Thanks, John. Mr. Imbert, will you be calling for Minister Swartzing to apologize to the upper house, or?
He has already said he didn't say that.
But you went back.
That's what I have to say. He said he didn't say that.
Will it be pursued? Opposition
Why
leader?
should you apologize to the upper house? Please explain.
Didn't he say that he?
I know. Please explain.
Didn't he say that property taxes were sent to the corporations, and you were suggesting that is not true?
You were taking notes,
I was taking notes.
I said paid and distributed.
Paid and distributed.
I never said sent. He never said that. I listened to his words. He said paid and distributed. He said that in the Senate.
Right.
That's a fact.
And
so what does he have to apologize for?
Well, if that was not so, given that corporations have said that they have not received funds with not including the House.
Well, that's for the senators to deal with. I'm not in the upper house. That's for our team. You could ask Dr. Browne that, for example. Yeah.
Sorry?
Yes, he's leading government business in the Senate.
Well, I just, what do you think of the fact that we're on the 1st of October and we don't have a budget date yet?
You're asking me that?
Yeah.
I am not Devendranath and Co. I think you should ask him.
But should we not have a budget date by now, given the fact that it has to be passed?
Question. I could give you some help. You need about 20 days to complete the exercise if you do it in the usual way. Okay? If you do it in the normal way, where you start at 10 in the morning, you go till 8 o'clock in the night, you don't have sittings on Saturdays and Sundays, you need about 20 days.
In the House,
but this political party has a habit. I remember in 2010 that they ran the budget 24 hours. I remember at 3 o'clock in the morning, going to then Prime Minister Bissessa, saying, look, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, why are we still debating? And what she told me at the time is that she had to go to a heads of government conference in Jamaica. So she was compressing the whole thing. So they just ran it right through, weekend, 24 hours. So they can do that. But a normal government would have indicated by now that the budget would be within the next couple of days.
Right.
Okay, I expect that if they are behaving normally, it will be on the 6th of October. So if they are behaving normally. And I'll explain why. With the new standing orders, no, hold on. With the new standing orders, you have to give the leader of the opposition 3 clear days. So I always had the budget on a Monday. So the 3 clear days would have been Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then the leader of the opposition begins on the Friday. And then you have to go for 4 or 5 days. And then you have 5 days of standing finance committee. The Senate, I believe, is just 3 days. Am I correct? So that if you do it normally, it'll be about 20 days. And then the budget division of the Ministry of Finance has to prepare the documents to go to the president for the president to assent to the appropriation bill. So they need about 2 days for that, 2-3 days. So if you start on the 6th, you'll get to the 26th or so, and by the 29th or the 30th of October, the president will have assented to the bill. The government cannot spend any money beyond the 31st of October according to the law. They have that period, the month of October, to spend. They're allowed to spend 10% of what was spent in the previous year during the month of October. From the time 1st of November reaches, if the budget is not assented to by the president, then the government can't spend any money. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Imbert, I know you have to run back to.
But I do have to run.
Okay, I'll now invite Senator the Honourable Amery Browne to address some matters as it relates to hunger and the statement there by the Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you to the Honourable Pennelope Beckles Robinson, Leader of the Opposition of Trinidad and Tobago. Some of our colleagues had to move to pressing duties, but I greet you all, members of the media and others present. My assignment today is a very clear one, to give some reflections on behalf of the opposition and the People's National Movement on the recent statement by the Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the United Nations General Assembly's High-Level Week. And I've seen a number of comments in the local space during and after the Prime Minister's offering of a national statement. Some of them were very positive. Usually those would have come from activists and supporters of the UNC. And some were negative, but focused on her delivery, references to slurring and stumbling. I'm not going to treat with those types of matters, but to examine the substance of the address. And what I would invite any dispassionate and right-thinking observer to do would be to review the Prime Minister's address in the context of statements made by other CARICOM heads of government who also spoke during High-Level Week, and also to look at statements made by Trinidad and Tobago in past years, which would have been delivered by the Honourable Keith Rowley at the time as Prime Minister, myself as Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, and others who would have delivered national statements during High-Level Week. Not on style, but on substance and content. What you would anticipate from a head of government at this, the highest opportunity in the diplomatic world, would be to introduce or reintroduce your country and your society to the world. It's a precious opportunity to do exactly that. So when you look at the statement, you look at the quotations used and references used in past years, and if you listen to Mia Motley and others, you would hear references to local calypsonians, historians, philosophers of your poets of your society, to introduce what are the priorities, what's the thinking, what are the standards of your country. What we heard instead were quotations from the President of the United States of America. This is in a Trinidad and Tobago national statement. References to the Secretary of State of the United States of America and an ambassador of the United States of America, not an ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago. Those were some of the quotations used in a Trinidad and Tobago national statement. All of that to say that in the context of what we would wish for in delivering Trinidad and Tobago at that level, this was one of the worst national statements in recent history. The content was poorly researched. There were references, for example, to the 60th anniversary of the United Nations, when the reference really should have been to the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. There was some confusion on a number of very fundamental thematic areas. I'll give a few examples. Let's begin with the zone of peace. Now, the Prime Minister is new in 2025, but she's not new as a head of government of Trinidad and Tobago. The concept of a zone of peace has been with us for decades in the Caribbean region, used not just by CARICOM, but by CELAC, the Association of Caribbean States, references even at the OAS, etc. So it really is unconscionable and unforgivable for a Prime Minister to go to this highest forum and to misconstrue and misstate and really denigrate such an important concept as the zone of peace. And even if she was confused in the early days, they have peddled and tossed around this phrase for several months now. So if she were able to listen to good advice, by now the Prime Minister should have gotten it right and had it clearly. Instead, what we heard there in New York was reference to the zone of peace as a false ideal. Now, that would have come as a lightning bolt and shock to everyone associated with CARICOM at this time. If we are saying the zone of peace is a false ideal, it means we have a very dangerous misunderstanding of what the zone of peace is. And then the Prime Minister went on to put it in the context of safety on the streets of any one member state, such as Trinidad and Tobago. That is just a flagrant and total misunderstanding of what the zone of peace represents. It speaks about the ethos within the Caribbean Sea as a whole. It speaks about the harmony between states, between nations as a region of sovereign states. So if one state is having challenges with crime, etc., that is not an affront to the zone of peace. That does not make the zone of peace a false ideal. So it's one thing to make these misstatements and misconstrue these regional pillars domestically, but to go to the high-level week of the United Nations and to do so in full view of the world and fellow heads of state of CARICOM, we'll have to do a lot of tidying up in the future on matters like this, very unfortunately. The Prime Minister dedicated the early part of her address to a lot of talk about narcotics and fighting narcotics. All well and good, but there was no reference to addressing the root cause of the narcotics challenge. There was no reference to the importance of reducing demand. And really, that entire segment appeared to borrow talking points from elsewhere, as opposed to putting a Trinidad and Tobago lens and perspective on a challenge that is shared by many nations. So there was nothing unique or significant except for the fact that it was just a focus on the end product and treating with the runners and traffickers. No reference whatsoever to demand. And what we would want the Prime Minister to bear in mind is that even in countries where there is the death penalty, even in countries where there's the death penalty for drug trafficking, such as Malaysia, some countries in the Near East and Far East, guess what? There is still a significant challenge, because if you don't eliminate demand, you can kill as many people as your policy might wish. The challenge remains. So whether here or at the United Nations, if we're speaking about these issues with wisdom and good advice, we would have a much more comprehensive approach, as opposed to simply parroting someone else's talking points. Speaking about parroting talking points, there was some reference to immigration in the national statement of Trinidad and Tobago at the UN General Assembly. But again, Trinidad and Tobago is a complex society. We are both a destination country for migrants, and we are a source country of migrants. The Prime Minister, in her remarks on this important issue, focused exclusively on the challenge posed by migrants coming into a state and gave no connection or reference to all nationals, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, who today, yesterday, and last month would be experiencing extreme conditions, being hunted, sometimes on camera, in other capitals, and being subject to treatment that they view as very inhumane. So again, at that forum, if you're dealing with these thematic issues, as a government of Trinidad and Tobago, the anticipation is that you deal with it a little more comprehensively, and while maybe advancing whatever talking points or angle you wish, acknowledge the role and importance of human rights and treating people in a humane manner, no matter what their source or destination might be. And I could just imagine our nationals right there in New York and elsewhere, some of whom have been communicating with us and talking about the tension, the pressure, the anxiety that they and their family members feel every day due to the weight of this sort of right-wing immigration approach that's sweeping parts of Europe and elsewhere. I'm not going to focus too much on the climate aspect of the Prime Minister's statement, just to say I heard reference to a climate agenda and the agenda of climate activists. Well, guess what? Trinidad and Tobago is a small island developing state. And some of the comments carried by the Prime Minister would have sent a chill to AOSIS and other SIDS and organizations connected, and to CARICOM as well, which has a very strong climate priority. I'll leave that issue there. There was also some talk about the United Nations Security Council. I'm glad the Prime Minister finally, she went to New York to mention that. Trinidad and Tobago is currently in the early stages of a campaign for a non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council for the period 2027 to 2028. She didn't say all of this, but I'm filling in some of the blanks. Fine. But the Prime Minister referred to a no objection to Trinidad and Tobago taking up such a position. Again, that's either confusion or yielding to very poor advice. There is no concept of a non-objection, no objection with respect to Trinidad and Tobago proceeding with this campaign. What we have achieved thus far is the endorsement of CARICOM, which occurred well before the 28th of April 2025, achieved by the former government, which took hard work, presentations to COFCO and to CARICOM meetings, a justification and outline of our approach. So a CARICOM endorsement was achieved. Still to be achieved is an endorsement from GRULAC, the group of Latin American and Caribbean states, a much bigger group, basically the states of the Western Hemisphere. And given the recent posturing and rhetoric of this government on issues crucial to member states of GRULAC, it's going to be very interesting how they would pursue such an endorsement at this time, because they are not campaigning to just be on some routine committee. This is to sit at the highest decision-making body in the globe, the Security Council. And the question to the Prime Minister, we got no sign really, no good sign from her national statement. What is the philosophy and perspective that Trinidad and Tobago, this little country, is going to take into the Security Council of the United Nations? That's a forum where major issues of peace and war and security are determined. And the world is listening to what we've been saying for the last few months, and many countries are very concerned about Trinidad and Tobago's direction as a small state. So there are questions to be answered. The concern is that the Prime Minister does not understand the process for achieving a non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council, and the content of her national statement indicated some degree of better advice needs to be brought to bear. There's still work to be done. There's a campaign to be mounted, and within that campaign, we have to offer something. And that's my overarching concern with the national statement. It gave no clear idea of what is Trinidad and Tobago, what makes us tick. Yes, talk about drugs and so on, but who are we? We are a diverse, beautiful society. We have a carnival, etc. And if you look at all other national statements that we've made, it was used as an opportunity to showcase and introduce Trinidad and Tobago to the world. There was that opportunity was missed. I cannot end without reference to the issue of Gaza. The fact that the Prime Minister chose not to mention the plight of the Palestinians, not to mention the word Gaza once in that national statement, is outrageous. If you listen to the statements brought by every other CARICOM leader, this is a priority for us in this part of the world. If you go back to Nelson Mandela and all the other greats, they've always been connected to the issue of the plight of the Palestinians. And now when the situation is at its very worst, an actual genocide, according to the very United Nations that she was addressing, is underway, the head of our country is silent on this matter. We view this as unconscionable. And when asked by, I believe it was CNC3, after the address, why didn't you raise it? The Prime Minister misled this country by saying that the Foreign Minister, the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, dealt with it at another forum. He did not deal with it at another forum. What he did was to respond to a question by the same CNC3 on the steps outside. And his response was a vague reference to a two-state solution. What's at stake now is not a two-state solution. Trinidad and Tobago has made its decision on that already under the People's National Movement. When we recognize the state of Palestine and we formally established diplomatic relations, what's at stake now is the voice, the clear voice of our nation speaking out against a genocide that is the genocide of our times. And what were we? We were silent. That is unconscionable. Unconscionable. So a couple other very, very quick points, and there was a lot to unpack in that particular statement. There was no reference to the Bridgetown Initiative and the challenges of financing for development, the reform of the global financial architecture, which Trinidad and Tobago has been a leading voice on in the last 4 to 5 years. When we've gone to Washington, D.C., when we've gone to the United Nations, etc., that's one of the pillars. Anchored in CARICOM, silence on those issues as well. There was no reference to Trinidad and Tobago's consistent stance against the sanctions on the Republic of Cuba. No mention. Again, I'm telling you, listen to the other CARICOM heads of state and go back to Trinidad and Tobago's past national statements. These are all almost statutory points that are pillars of our foreign policy positioning. And when we talk about Trinidad and Tobago punching above our weight class, it doesn't refer to parroting talking points from other capitals. It refers to our clear principled position on these types of key issues. They were absent. They were removed from the Prime Minister's national statement. No reference to reparations or reparatory justice. Basic, elemental thematic issues at the core of what makes Trinidad and Tobago's voice important. And I can go on for quite some time, but the most disturbing was a lack of reference to the United Nations Charter. And as a core member of the United Nations, in the build-up to our campaign for a non-permanent seat at the Security Council, it appears that international law and the UN Charter falls very low in the terms of reference of the current government of Trinidad and Tobago. That was evidenced in their very knee-jerk and instant cheerleading for actions that are very controversial even in Washington, D.C. right now, with reference to their consistency with international law. And therefore, when you listen to the substance of what the Prime Minister would have delivered, there's very little to no reference to the United Nations Charter and the importance of international law as the basic pillar of all Trinidad and Tobago's actions and all of the actions of the Caribbean community. So all of that to say that this national statement for 2025 was very disappointing. And while we could acknowledge that the activists would say, yes, great statement, we're proud, the fact is Trinidad and Tobago was let down at High Level Week this year. Thank you very much.
Okay, so can I now invite questions to Senator Browne? Yes? If any? Okay, so can I take it there are no questions? So go right ahead.
Introduce it a little bit, but what's going on in Venezuela? There's a strange thing at the moment, is that you've got these, well, a fleet somewhere in the Caribbean between
Well said.
we don't know where.
Somewhere in the Caribbean.
And at the same time, there's this go-ahead for this deal, whether it's the incorrectly worded cross-border thing, whether it's dragon gas deal or whatever. Which we're going to need the Venezuelan collaboration to do that, and yet you have this armada, and the whole thing it's just very odd.
Well, I think the overall caution that we have had and we maintain is that Trinidad and Tobago, as a small and traditionally responsible state, must always choose its words and positions based on principle as opposed to convenience and emotion. And we have been contributing in the last 2 to 3 months to a non-productive regional environment. The Prime Minister has detached and isolated this country from CARICOM at an alarming level, not attending the heads of government meeting, not attending with her colleagues at the CARICOM Africa Summit, not sending the Minister of Agriculture to the Minister of Agriculture's CARICOM meeting in the last week, and in his statements downplaying the role of CARICOM and upplaying a sort of we are all on our own when it comes to regional security. At the last media conference, I laid a challenge to the media to hold the Prime Minister to account, to ask her for an account of her stewardship as the lead within CARICOM on regional security. I refresh that challenge. What have you done in that position? Have you convened or caused to be convened any regional discussion on security, given the challenges and observations and developments you yourself, as the media, have been reporting?
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I will have a few areas that I would like to address. And I know in the public domain, of course, there were all sorts of questions about me attending and being present at UNGA. So let me just say that I think it's important as I start this to say what was the theme of this General Assembly. Better together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights. That's the theme. So that I think we need to, when we have these discussions, to ensure that we factor that into discussions. Now, I've been going to the UN for the last 3 decades. It's not anything new. Of course, I'm leader of the opposition, so you're there now, and there's a lot of questions have been asked. But I served as the ambassador 2016 to 2020, and I've been going there as Minister of Social Development, gave my statement. I've been going there as Minister of Public Utilities and the Environment, Culture and Tourism. I've been going there before I became a minister as someone who was involved in the women's movement and attended CSW. So I've been invited to speak for a number of events that took place during the General Assembly. And I think everyone knows that you have side events that take place. And that is when a lot of the discussions take place in relation to the very theme of which I spoke about. The key aspects being, of course, marking the 80th anniversary, reminding about global commitments, and of course, underscoring the importance of multilateralism. So that I was invited, for example, to speak by the Inter-Parliamentary Union. I moderated a panel on achieving gender equality, gender responsive assemblies. I mean, I am the president, as you know, of the Women's Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. So that, I mean, if you get this kind of opportunity, you can well imagine how significant it is for me, where you have a number of other women parliamentarians from, from Latin America, Africa, and other parts of the world, sharing with you the importance of women in parliament, of women leaders, and many people being fascinated by the fact that Trinidad and Tobago is probably the only country where you have a woman president, a woman prime minister, and a leader of the opposition, which people ask me a lot of questions about. And sharing, of course, that this is 30 years since the Beijing platform, where you looked at the increased participation of women in politics. And they're looking at the fact that at that time, 30 years ago, you were at 11% and we only at 26%. So those are some of the discussions, and of course the whole issue of domestic violence. So, the issue of the killing of the young girl in Trinidad came up. People read these things, now that you have technology. And of course the statement made by the Honourable Prime Minister about the amount of murders and so that took place in Trinidad over the last couple of years. So I spoke about that. Attended the UN Women, where they looked at the progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically as it relates to gender equality. Because at the end of the day, when you go and report at the UN, you really want to talk about how your country has done as it relates to all these Sustainable Development Goals, of course, of which women is one. Also to attend the Aspire Artemis Foundation held at the Microsoft building, that spoke about how women's leadership has shaped climate resilience, digital equity, and cultural diplomacy, building bridges for trade, innovation, and diplomacy. I also attended with Worldwide Technology to talk about renewable energies. And I attended the Health Innovative Exchange, which specifically talked about connecting the unconnected and building shared infrastructure, climate health resilience through innovation and financing. And I mean, all of these topics are so very, very important for us here in Trinidad and Tobago, because the focus really, most of the time, in some instances, being on women, and a lot of times talking about the challenges as it relates to climate change and how it impacts, as well as having the opportunity to meet with the diaspora, who many of them, of course, are very, very concerned and genuinely in a panic about what is going on in Trinidad and Tobago as it relates to Venezuela. And more importantly, having had the opportunity themselves to hear what the Prime Minister said in this recent statement and their genuine fear as to what can happen. I mean, I recall I was in Barbados when, they invaded Grenada. I had the opportunity to go to the airport and see some of those planes and couldn't figure out if, the kinds of vehicles that I saw coming out of those planes, I mean, the size was just unbelievable. So whilst those of us may think that, or hope and pray, and I think all of us want this to remain a zone of peace, because when the Prime Minister says that's a false ideal, you can well imagine how people are beginning to feel. So to have the opportunity, I mean, if I have served as an ambassador and I have been going to the UN over 3 decades, I mean, if you are there and your Prime Minister is speaking, yes, the option is you may be somewhere else. But I think that, the opportunity for me as a leader of the opposition to be there at that time, to go and attend, I think that it is something I was there personally. I heard for myself, and I didn't have to read it anywhere. I heard exactly, what was said, as well as having the opportunity to listen to several of the other CARICOM prime ministers and presidents that spoke. So I was there. Mia Motley, I heard the Prime Minister of Antigua, I heard the Prime Minister of Belize, and several other prime ministers, and you had the opportunity, of course, to, as someone who has understood the importance of CARICOM, that has existed for years, that on most of the positions at the United Nations, CARICOM normally takes a position. CARICOM normally meets during UNGA, and they're critical things, not just as it relates to climate change, but as it relates to NCDs, as it relates to issues of migration. But one of the most critical areas has always been the issue of climate change. So that the Honourable Prime Minister spoke, of course, about the antagonistic approach adopted by climate activists towards the implementation of their climate agenda does more harm than good. Now, October is always a very interesting month for us, because that's one of the months when the rainy season is there, and we are seeing flooding taking place in parts of Trinidad and Tobago that we traditionally did not expect. We are seeing that within 15 to 20 minutes, Port of Spain is literally underwater. I mean, and I am sure every single one of you here has been paying attention to the fact that it's been attributed to climate change. I mean, whether we look at what's happening in terms of agriculture, when you have flowering, when you can't get produce, and we know the relationship between climate change and agriculture, the availability of food. I mean, all those things are relevant for us. So that, I was really quite surprised at that statement, more importantly, because it was actually under this government, Trinidad and Tobago actually co-chaired the Paris Agreement for an ambitious global climate agenda, an agreement with full support of the government, and it was the TT's leadership that consolidated the concept of the NDCs and secured a decision even before the Paris Agreement was adopted. I mean, I actually had the good fortune of being the ambassador at the time to lodge our instruments. And I mean, this whole issue of force feeding and blackmail and, whether or not there's coercion, that is really strange. And I mean, the question that one asks now is, what is our position as it relates to the Paris Agreement? We know that the President of the United States has always made it clear that he does not support the Paris Agreement. As if I recall correctly, he made it clear that they're going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. Now, when I listened to what the Honourable Prime Minister said, the question I asked myself, is that going to be our position? Whether this government is going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. So there are just a couple other things that I would like to raise, and that now, the issue of pensioners not receiving their pension. Now, some of you were here on the last occasion when I talked about people getting their social, their checks late, and, I was criticized, and somebody asked me to send the names of the person. Lo and behold, it was true. And now we have that what you call the direct deposits, which is where you have provided all your information, so your monies go straight to your account, basically, that no monies have been received. So we are really calling on the government to explain to pensioners of all people, who depend on that for your medication and all your basic needs, to explain to the public what is the situation as it relates to pensioners not receiving their pension and not receiving their direct deposits. I also want to make mention of the fact that in terms of another vexing issue, which is that of the breakfast shed. That is an institution that is part of the cultural fabric of Trinidad and Tobago. And, you know, to say exactly what is the issue, and we have heard that it's an issue of rent not being paid. There is seems to be unclear whether or not they were served a notice of eviction or whether they were not served. But we are really calling on the government to have some proper discussions and collaboration with the vendors. Again, if those of you who go to the breakfast shed, I mean, I have been going to the breakfast shed for the last couple decades. You know, it's most of the persons selling are women. And so therefore, if there was an issue of electricity, an issue of water, this is a matter that the government should look very closely at before they simply deny persons who have been selling there for years, denying them the opportunity to continue without proper collaboration, without proper dialogue, and I'm therefore calling on them for the appropriate dialogue. The last matter that I want to mention is that of the mass firings at the Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs. I have with me a letter that was written by the Deputy Permanent Secretary indicating that the Honourable Minister decided that there will be no rehiring of short staff throughout the ministry once the officer's term has ended, so that there are many divisions within the ministry, whether it be Nicholas Towers, Chepstow House, the various sporting facilities, the various programs, whether it be SHAPE, whether it be Pink Region, where by next month, all those positions would not be renewed. I raised it in the context of Keyshawn Walcott just having one goal, in the context of Jereme Richards, in the context of TKR, and the government making it very clear about their commitment to youth and sports. And here it is that we are adding this category to CPEP workers, reforestation workers, and the many other persons that is now becoming a common practice for the government, of course, to be not renewing contracts, firing people. And I dare say this is going to be a bleak Christmas for a lot of persons who were employed and would no longer be employed during the Christmas vacation and continuing. So, any questions? Yes.
Right. Right. You spoke about short-term staff in this particular ministry, but there was also an announcement from the government about contract staff not going to be rehired. Are you getting any? Because I stop and talk to the
Yes.
pie man, and he says, "Boy, you ain't hear about a set of people gone from that ministry," and you get like little rumblings on the
Yes,
ground.
in a lot of ministries, Ministry of Housing, as I said, Ministry of Sports, there are many ministries where people are being sent home. And of course, we know that if you look at the industrial court, I mean, a lot of these people who are being sent home in the Ministry of Sports were there since the UNC government. You know, so we wait because the industrial court clearly has a decision on this matter, that when you have people working continuously for this period, they cannot just be easily dismissed. Yes, any further questions? Okay, thank you very much, everyone.